I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to counsellingskillsacademy.com.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How you doing, Ken?
I'm well, thank you for asking, Rory. I'm delighted to be here, and both Rory and I are delighted that you've joined us for episode 229 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Popcast. I don't know what I'm thinking there, Rory. Pop stars we are. Podcast. So what can you expect in episode 229? Well, we start off with those counselling foundations where we revisit the basic theories and principles that underpin counselling. And today, a theory from the person-centered approach, and we're looking at the 7 stages of process. Moving on to focus on self, where we recognize you are the heartbeat of your practice, and we need to look after ourselves and take care of ourselves in order to be there for the clients that we see. And today we're going to be looking at the difference between reflective and reflexive and how we can use that within our growth and within our practice. And then we go on to Practice Matters, where today we have an interview with an expert. It is a favorite of Counselling Tutor and a really good friend of Counselling Tutor. It's Amy Launder speaking about working with survivors of narcissistic abuse. Rory reached out, an amazing interview, so make sure you stick around for that. But starting off with the foundations, we always put the foundations in first, Rory, so that we can build upon it. And today we're looking at the 7 stages of process.
Yes, it was the final part of Roger's big theory, and it started really in 1951 when Carl Rogers produced the 19 propositions, which were published in Client-Centered Therapy. Then we moved through to 1957, where Rogers talked about the 6 necessary and sufficient conditions for therapeutic change. And then on his book On Becoming a Person in 1961, he talked about the 7 stages of process. And through that arc of 10 years, what Rogers did was he built a foundation of personality in the 19 propositions. He then went to develop a way of engaging with clients and building the therapeutic relationship in the necessary and sufficient therapeutic conditions. And then finally, he brought us the 7 stages of process. And here's the bombshell, Ken. It's a form of measurement. It's a phenomenological form of measurement, because Rogers talked about growth and osmosis. And in my understanding of osmosis is, it is how plants grow. And it is a way of measurement. There's 7 stages of process. You can use it very briefly and very kind of lightly to chart the growth of a client through the arc of therapy. And that is why Rogers' theory is so elegant. It's phenomenologically based, but it's based in real science. People forget Rogers was a hard-nosed psychologist. He was a numbers guy. He was a researcher, and he built this little ecosystem of ideas that gave us a client-centered therapy.
I love this. I mean, you said a bombshell, Rory, and that was like a going off as you were saying that, because often on our Facebook group and in emails that we receive, we get questions about, can you really do assessment if you're working in a purely client-centered way? Because surely the client is leading the way. And here we see Rogers has built assessment into the model. It's there. We are assessing, where is this person at? We have a scale. And you were speaking about Rogers being a scientist, a hard-nosed scientist, which of course he was. And science is about measurements. You know, often I think that the person-centered approach is is spoken about as woolly and fluffy. But when you really dig into it and go deep into the theories, everything you need is there. And I love the 7 stages of process, also known as the journey from fixity to fluidity. And you were speaking about osmosis, Rory. Osmosis, if I'm going back to my days in South Africa, to the classroom where I was studying biology. It was called Standard 9, I think we did cell biology. And osmosis is the process of something moving from a high pressure to a low pressure, or something going through the walls of a cell. So water going through the wall of the cell, moving from one place to another place. And that's exactly what we're seeing with our clients, where they may come in going in maybe one of the early stages, where they will be going, well, it's everybody else has got a problem. If the world could change, my life would be better. If you had a job like mine, you would also be experiencing my problems. If you'd lived a life like mine, you would. So everything's about the past. It's fixed and I'm stuck, to a place of fluidity. And that's where we're aiming to go in person-centered therapy, where the person is more accepting of the feelings in the here and now, and accepting the journey as something they have been on, not something that anchors them and holds them back.
Yeah, I like that, Ken. I like that a lot. And you're absolutely right. You know, the 7 stages of process charts a journey from being very fixed in the world. It's everybody else and they have to change and not me, to the idea that the world is a fluid place and that changes, we have to change to adapt to the world. And, you know, the more I read Rogers, the more I appreciate just what a genius he was, because that links in to the 19 propositions. It links into the fact the world is changing round us and we adapt to that changing world. And it's those who don't adapt that have the biggest difficulties. And I like to call those 3 theories, the 19 propositions, the 6 necessary and sufficient conditions, and the 7 stages of process, the Trinity, because those are the table legs that hold a tabletop on of person-centered therapy. If you take one of those legs away, the whole thing collapses.
Yep.
And it's true. And, you know, we taught for a good few years, Ken, and part of our assessment board's criteria for the final portfolios, final exam, if you like, was people had to use the theory to chart a person's progress, and they had to speak about where the client was and how that fitted in. So it's a very elegant, and I think possibly it's a very subjective view of measurement, because it's based on the therapist looking and saying, well, this is what, you know, this is. The client saying this is how they've changed. So it's not a kind of quantitative measurement, it's a qualitative measurement. So those of you who are doing research, quantitative is numbers, qualitative is observation.
I can see the pencil scribbling down, Rory. This is important stuff. These are extra marks, specifically in something like a case study. In a case study, you know, when that client came in, where were they at? Where did they? I mean, this is of course if you are working from a person-centered approach, and your rewarding body is setting criteria according to the theory of person-centered. But where was that person where they came in? Was there any change? Did they maybe move from one stage to a different stage during that process? That is part of the journey. That gets you the extra marks, and you're referring well to the theory there. Now, I've got an interesting one for you, Rory.
Right, okay.
You know, Rogers speaks about his potato experiment. I love the potato experiment.
Yes.
So for those of you who don't know the potato experiment, Rogers took some potatoes, put them in an environment where they were maybe a little starved of light and that they wouldn't need, but yet still those potatoes growed. The organism strived to be what it was meant to be. And, you know, when we're speaking about therapy, we're speaking about counseling, we often think that takes place within a special room or online where you have a therapist and a person. But I put it to you, Rory, here's my sneaky theory now, that the 7 stages of process is part of the organism's development as we go through life. And I'll tell you where I'm basing this. If you speak to people that are in their senior years, they seem to have a softer approach on life, a more accepting approach. Not everyone, but it tends to be that as we go through life and we live life, our organism tends towards that more open, more accepting mindset. Not in everyone, but it's kind of just a bit of a Ken theory being put forward there. Don't put this in your assignments, by the way. Don't put this in your assignment. This is just me musing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It speaks to, you know, a development of life, but it also speaks, I think, to client motivation. One of the things that never fails to amaze me, Ken, is how Roger's work is right. And, you know, recently, John Norcross at Scranton University looked at what we call common factors. And we've done a podcast on common factors. And interestingly, one of the things that comes out is motivation, client motivation to change. And this is exactly what the 7 stages of process is about. If someone's motivated to change, you know, you can give them, you know, as using the potato analogy, all the water and all the food. But there needs to be some kind of movement from the potato. The potato needs to be alive enough to be able to absorb it and to be able to grow and develop. And, you know, Rogers, when he was at Wisconsin, he did his psych project where he worked with people with psychosis. And his research showed that people with psychosis were as likely to get a benefit from therapy as were the general population who didn't have psychosis, but motivation was the key. So it does speak to how motivated people are, which brings me, and I've got a puzzler for you, Ken. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, go.
Tony Merry in Learning and Being, which is, I think, is a really, really good foundation book if you're a student of counselling and psychotherapy, says if somebody's in stage 1 of the 7 stages of process, is it actually ethical to counsel them?
I like that.
Because they are saying, well, I don't need to change, everybody else does.
Yeah. So we got a super duper handout, so I'm referencing that now. So I just wanted to give you the background for this. In the super duper handout that Rory created, it refers to stage 1 as the individual in this stage of fixity and remoteness of experience is not likely to come voluntarily for therapy. And you know, what does that mean? Well, it basically means if somebody is in stage 1, the issue doesn't sit with them. It's everybody else. It's their life. It's their boss. It's their partner. It's their kids. Everything is externalized. So why should I go for therapy? They should all be going for therapy so that they can fix themselves, so that life can be okay. So it's unlikely that a person in stage 1 would present for therapy. However, somebody might present in stage 1 to their GP, and the GP might suggest, maybe counselling would be a place for you to go. And they might dip the toe in with crossed arms and a kind of remoteness. And I guess the question is it ethical to continue to work with them if the problems all around them are not situated in self, Rory?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion to have with peers in the classroom. And one of the things that I would note, and one of the things that Ken and myself taught, was one of the ways that you can assess where someone is if they use they or I. So if you're talking to someone and he's saying, well, they're saying this and they're saying, but if he's saying I am experiencing, I am feeling, then there's a sense there of some kind of self-awareness, that there's some responsibility being taken. Now, that's a broad statement. You know, people may have self-awareness and still use the they. But I think that once people start to interject and say, I am having difficulty with people, at that point, they're on a process of self-exploration and self-journey. And this is what the propositions are about. And I think what's really interesting is that, you know, he talks about stage 1 of the 19 propositions where clients are unlikely to present. But if we go right to the other side of the 7 stages of process, in stage 7, you're not likely to see a client in stage 7 because effectively they're engaging with the world as it is. And indeed in stage 6, possibly they're taking the learning from therapy and they are journeying and engaging with the world and thinking about their own processes. It's a fascinating phenomenological set of measurements. And, I'm going to say, Ken, I think it's sometimes forgotten. I think there's a lot of focus put on 19 propositions, a huge amount on the necessary and sufficient conditions. Yeah. But the 7 stages of process is one of those table legs. It's just as important. And I think once people understand it and engage with it, the therapy makes so much sense. And the service to the client, I think, improves.
Bingo. And that's the main reason we have these conversations. If you're a student, you'll be looking at the 7 stages of process if you're studying the person-centered approach. But maybe if you've qualified, maybe the last time you looked at those 7 stages of process was during your studies. Well, then maybe a positive challenge in your direction is do yourself a favor and go and get the super duper handout that Rory's created, because it goes through the 7 stages of process, outlines what they are, but it also outlines where a client may be within those processes, how they might present. So it kind of gives us a clue. It gives us a heads up to where they may be. And just revisiting that theory, as you say, Rory, is done in service of our clients. And it is elegant. And it does. I mean, if you've ever sat on a 3-legged stool with only 2 legs, you'll know it's hard work because you're trying to balance the whole time. You're doing a lot of work. You need that 3rd leg for it to be balanced and for it to have its elegance. It is part of the theory is a theory in its entirety. And I think you're right, Rory. So much emphasis is put on what is sometimes referred to as the core conditions, just 3 of the 6 conditions.
Don't care. I'm feeling faint.
I know. We've spoken about this in other podcasts, but it is the necessary and sufficient conditions are wrapped by the rest of the theory. They make sense in the rest of the theory. So if you want to get Rory's super duper handout, how do you do that? Well, it's free. You just go to counsellingtutor.com. That's our mother website. Make sure you visit that. And in the very top menu bar, you will see there is a podcasts tab. Click on the podcast tab, make your way to episode 229 right there on the page. You'll find all the show notes for today, including any links to extra resources, and you'll be able to download Rory's super duper handout of the 7 stages of process from that page. There's those foundations, Rory. Onto those foundations today, we're going to build a bit of a focus on self and look at 2 words: reflective, reflexive.
Yes, and it's interesting. This word has really come into the vocabulary of counselling, I think, only in the last few years, and certainly into things like assignments and teaching. And it's a word that comes up, occasionally in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. We're a closed group. Knock on the door, and our kind, wonderful moderation team will let you in, and you can see and meet hundreds of like-minded people talking about topics in the world of counselling, psychotherapy, students, there's qualified colleagues, we've got tutors, we've got some supervisors, and it's a debate, and people talk about things, and reflexivity comes up. And I think that, when I did my studies, there was a lot of focus on reflection. We need to be reflective. In other words, we need to sit and think and ponder and think about what we're doing. But actually, that's fine. But actually, at some point, we need to say, right, I'm going to change things. And this is what I'm going to do. And that is, of course, being reflexive. So reflection is thinking about, what's gone on and what you might do. Reflexive is actually doing the things that you might change. And it's coming up a lot in assignments. And I don't know about you, Ken, but I found myself in supervision as a supervisor, saying to supervisees, okay, you've had to think about what's happened. What are you going to do about it? I am a bit of a direct supervisor, I have to say. So what are you going to do about it? And that is the point where you're asking someone to be reflexive.
Yeah, and I think it spans certainly our formal core studies to become counsellors. As you said, Rory, you're going to certainly see this in assignment language and in criteria language. I think it comes down to personal development as well. This is where I find myself at the moment. There we go. I've been reflective. This is where I find myself at the moment. But what am I going to do? And even if I'm not going to do anything, I'm going to let myself be in this. That is being reflexive. You've decided at least something, a course of action. With our casework, what's going on in our casework and how we present that in supervision. And as you said, Rory, as supervisors, looking if you've got a supervisee coming in and they're bringing, this is where I'm at, putting in that reflexivity of, okay, what now? What are we going to do? What is the action plan, or what are the steps that are going to be taken to have some form of movement there? So it is, I think I like the word, and I'll be honest, Rory, when I studied that the word reflective was definitely there, very, very reflective. I heard it again and again and again, but reflexive seems to have been, well, for me, certainly from my frame of reference, is a word that I only learned within the last maybe 8-9 years.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. It's really, really interesting, and what I did notice, I first came across it in higher education training, people who are doing degrees and masters. The word reflexivity came a lot, and I think there's a batch of new writers who are writing certainly in things like supervision, and they're talking about supervision being an active activity, not just sitting having a cup of tea and a chat, but actually helping a supervisee think what they're going to do, because we can't as practitioners bury our heads in the sand. There are some cases where we have to do things, and I'm not going to talk for everybody. I'm sure there's a lot of reflexive practitioners out there, but I do think that it was something that wasn't really drilled into me in training. And I think it speaks to the fact that our profession is now a professional profession. We're not an emerging profession. When I started, we are a professional organisation as a group of members, and sometimes we have to take action. And I think that speaks to being accountable. And I welcome it, to be honest, Ken, because I think that we work with some very difficult situations. And sometimes we have to make a decision. We have to take action.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad that the word is now encouraged and is part of being a counsellor, really. And I think about CPD, Rory, and how when you look now, certainly here in the UK, one would evidence one's CPD. You don't just do CPD and go, there you go, I've done that. You're going to evidence it. You're going to write down what CPD you've done. And when you look to some of the ethical bodies here in the UK, they will require that you state what CPD you did. And then they're going to ask you about your reflection and your reflexivity around that. So after that CPD, you might reflect on that and have a think about that. But then how does that apply to your practice or not apply to your practice? So reflexivity doesn't mean always having to take action. We can be reflexive and then not take action because that's the decision that has been made. But it is the process of deciding, is action required here? How is that action gonna play out? So you may go and do some CPD. You may sit and think about that CPD, and then you may think, I am going to implement this into my practice like such. And there you have shown yourself to be reflective, because you need to reflect in order to be reflexive. So it kind of evidences that the CPD is actually doing something rather than just being a process of, I guess, a simulation where it just washes over us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Ken. And I think a good supervisor, would pick up on the supervisee's areas of development, and maybe I send my supervisees information, but I always follow up and say, I will be asking you next time we meet. I put it in my notes. Next time we meet, what have you done about it? And they know that when we meet at some point, I'm going to say, I sent you that information. Tell me what you've learned. Tell me how you might apply it. And it speaks to the formative area in supervision. Normative, formative, and restorative. Formative is an educational element, and supervisors should always be encouraging CPD, should be encouraging curiosity in their supervisees. And I think as a counsellor, you need to be a curious person about your profession. You need to think, look, I don't know anything about that. Maybe it's just a case of getting downloading a book or going onto the internet. But It's ongoing curiosity. That's my phrase du jour, Ken. Ongoing curiosity should be our clarion call, I think, in terms of this podcast anyway.
I like it. And you've mentioned supervision. I think it's right for me to mention, if you are at that point in your counselling career where you're considering training as a supervisor, well, Counselling Tutor, Rory and myself and our team of tutors, we do offer supervision training. And if you're interested in that, go to counsellingtutor.com. Right there on the homepage, everything is available. All the information is available for when our intake dates are for that. And I guess in closing that off, Rory, I wonder, after listening to this podcast today about reflective and reflexivity, what you might reflect on and what you might do differently. And I'm linking this to a thought, Rory. We run at Counselling Tutor, we run a CPD library for qualified practitioners, full of lectures and resources. And when you finish doing the CPD, you can claim a certificate. And it says, here's the thing, it says 1.5 hours of CPD. And the lecture may only have been an hour long. So where does the extra half an hour come from? If it's 1.5 hours of CPD and it's only a 50-minute lecture, how does that work? And of course that works. That there is a process we should go through in reading the material that goes along with that. And then we're going to reflect on it, what we've learned, what that meant to us. And then there should be a reflexive process. How can that apply to me in my practice? Because of course CPD is done in benefit of our clients, and if it is done as either a way to tick a box to say to our awarding body, yeah we've done those hours, or as a way to go say, oh, I've got another certificate I can put in my file now, let me move on to the next CPD lecture, then we're not doing right by ourselves and we're not doing right by our clients. By being reflective and reflexive, it makes a difference. It makes the CPD, the learning we do, the thoughts we have, into actions that actually make a difference at client level.
Bravo, Ken. I want to give you a round of applause for that.
Thanks, Rory.
That final speech. because it's the living, breathing, it's the living part of our practices, the fact that we are engaging in material, developing our knowledge, and we're not kind of just, like a pittle in a jar on a shelf, just pittled. We are developing ourselves. And I think, I will say this, there's never been a better time to do CPD. There is so much more information. When I started 20 years ago, there was a few books which were massively expensive. The internet was around, but it wasn't that sophisticated. Nowadays, the information is changing, and it's changing rapidly.
Yep.
Something you could know today might change. And in fact, I had a colleague many years ago who did a course on post-traumatic stress disorder, did the course. When she'd finished it, she came back and discovered that actually what she'd learned was out of date. The very minute her certificate landed through her letterbox, it was out of date, and she had to do another course because they'd found more information and different ways of working. So, even if you've got piles of certificates, doesn't mean that information is still valid. Ours is a fluid, changing profession, and it's driven by client experience. It's driven by lived experience of our clients. And, what they tell us may not fit the orthodoxy of the theories that go around. New theories are developed, new learning is taken, and we become more effective in the service of our clients, Ken.
Love it. Well, there you have. That is that focused on self, reflective. How's that going to make a difference in your practice? And then we move on to practice matters, where we dip our two toes, maybe even, into the world of practice, and we look at what we might come across, and that might be a presentation, it might be the day-to-day running of a practice. And today, Rory, you met with a good friend and regular lecturer for our CPD library of Counselling Tutor, Amy Launder, and spoke about the topic of working with survivors of narcissistic abuse.
Yes, I mean, Amy has spoken and done lectures on narcissism before, but this particular lecture is working with survivors of narcissistic abuse. Again, just linking into the last section. a emerging presentation that people are now recognizing that this is happening to them. And she's delivered a fantastic lecture on this. And I asked her about some of the ways we work with survivors of narcissistic abuse. And this is what she told us.
Practice matters.
The National Counselling Society is proud to sponsor Practice Matters. National Counselling Society are really excited to have launched their Children and Young People Therapist Register for counsellors working with the younger age group. To find out more, visit nationalcounselingsociety.org. nationalcounselingsociety.org.
And we welcome back one of our favourite presenters. Our audience loves Amy Launder, and who's done a fantastic lecture for the Counsellor CPD Library on working with survivors of narcissistic abuse. So welcome back, Amy. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me again.
So you've done. We talked in podcast 224 about what narcissism is, and narcissistic personality disorder, and now we're looking at the other side of the coin, I guess, where people may have suffered under the hands or the actions of someone who is, by all accounts, a narcissist. So what is the first thing we have to think about when we work with someone who's survived narcissistic abuse?
Well, I think one of the most important things is that they often don't realise that they have suffered from narcissistic abuse. What you'll often see is clients coming in being really confused about how the relationship ended, why it ended, and what they did wrong, because the whole relationship is designed almost to make them the bad guy. They're the cause of all the problems. So when the relationship ends, they're blaming themselves and looking at themselves rather than at what the other person has done.
Yes, and when we talked about one of the things we talked about in episode 224 was how narcissists may be initially attracted to someone who may be successful, and then use the success and the fact that someone's got a successful career as a way of blaming that person for the relationship not working.
Yes, definitely. So it's often the things that initially attracted the narcissist to their victim that then becomes a source of contention. So it maybe then makes the narcissist feel bad that they're not as successful, so then they try to tear the victim down. They also are constantly moving the goalposts. So if the narcissist wants the victim to have a successful career, once they've achieved that, then the narcissist might complain that they're not home enough, and you know the goalposts are always moving and the narcissist is never satisfied.
Yeah, so it sounds like the relationship is built on shifting sand. The people can't find the feet. And I'd like to pick up on something you said. You talked about sometimes people not realising that they are actually a survivor of narcissistic abuse. And I think that's something that I've identified in my practice. I've certainly worked with clients who believe that if they've just done a little better, if they just worked a little harder, if they could have just been a bit more, the relationship would have survived. And it's small things that come up where, for me, you can pick them up. And one of the things is gaslighting. Gaslighting is a favourite kind of trick of someone who is abusing someone in a narcissistic way, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. And actually, when you look at where that term actually came from, you can then start to see gaslighting in all sorts of different ways. So it actually came from a play that was called Gaslight or Gaslit, which is all about a husband trying to drive his wife crazy in order to get away with the things that he was doing. And it is all about the gas lights in the apartment kept dimming because he was turning lights on elsewhere in the building and claiming that he wasn't. So that's where the term comes from. So any situation where you're being made to feel like you're crazy or you're too sensitive or anything like that, when actually you're just responding to something that they're doing, is a form of gaslighting.
Yes, I can remember many years ago someone telling me about a window in their house, and the person came and said, "Have you opened that window?" And my client said, "No, I've not opened it." And the person who clearly had opened it, was only two people in this place, denied point blank to the point where the person said, well, it must have been me then. And you're absolutely right. This second guessing is very, very difficult. I'm wondering, can it be a revelation to some clients that actually this has gone on? Does it go under the radar until it's brought into the awareness?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even just the other day, a client described a whole almost year-long friendship, not even a relationship, where all sorts of things were happening. And then I started talking to this client about the patterns of what a narcissist does and the things that they say. And it was just completely blew the client's mind that all of this had gone on and they hadn't realized what was going on. It was hiding passports and cutting out the internet and all sorts of things like that she just thought it was the person being strange, not that there was a name for it or that other people went through it. And I think it very often can be a massive revelation, and actually then being able to Google it afterwards, after you find out, and see that you're not alone, I think can be quite helpful.
Yes, because I too remember, I didn't see the play Gaslight, but I remember watching the black and white TV program many years ago. And one of the things that it strikes me about gaslighting is that other people find it hard to believe because the abuser can be so plausible, can be a very plausible person.
Yeah, and actually what was so interesting recently on Netflix, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a docuseries called Bad Vegan. Nothing to do with her being a vegan, but it's this guy that comes into her life, and I think over a series of a couple of years, she sent him $1.7 million because he kept saying, I'm endangering money. And it's like the Tinder swindler and all these people managing to get massive amounts of money out of their victims by being that plausible. But to the outside observer, it seems so implausible. Like, how could you fall for it? But when you're in the middle of it, it's really difficult to see clearly.
Yes, and I suppose that's another aspect, because I would imagine that some people would feel a little foolish because everybody else could see what was going on. I can remember many years ago, there was someone who convinced his flatmates he was a secret agent, and he had them hiding in the cellar of a disused house for years, or a long time, if my memory serves me. And it was only, and he actually fooled the police as well. The police actually believed he arrested someone and produced a fake MI5 identity card.
Wow.
And it was only after a few years that he actually got caught out. But he was very, very plausible. And yes, you're absolutely right. Clients, it may seem so real, and I guess that's the message, isn't it? It can seem so real, you might be thinking you're losing your mind.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's the other side of it as well, where the victim themselves starts to realize that something is off. But because the narcissist is so charming to everyone else and different with the victim, everyone else doesn't see what's going on and doesn't maybe believe the victim when they do start coming out and saying that there's something wrong, almost believing maybe that the victim is the one that's abusive or that is actually crazy or seeing things and making things up. And something that a narcissist will do is when they can no longer control the way that the victim sees themselves, they'll try and control how everyone else sees the victim. So they'll start spreading rumors and lies and stories about how horrible the victim is.
Yes, it's really, really interesting, and it happens more than you think. Many years ago, I had someone I knew whose son it was definitely displaying narcissistic traits, and he had a girlfriend who was a vegetarian, and he made her eat meat.
Wow, yeah.
And I think that kind of really summed it up, that kind of power imbalance. So I'm curious, is there a gender issue here? So, are people who would present as survivors of narcissistic abuse mainly women, or is there men? Well, is it across the genders?
It is across the genders. I was really careful in recording the lecture to try to be gender neutral, but it's difficult because I think there is maybe a higher prevalence of people that come forward where the victim is female and the perpetrator is male. But I think it definitely does. I mean, I've seen in my personal life, friends who are male who have been victims of female narcissists. So it definitely happens both ways, but I think maybe there's a higher prevalence of male narcissistic abusers and female victims. I think in females, it maybe comes across more in friendships and social media and stuff rather than in romantic relationships, perhaps.
Yes, it's fascinating, and I suppose that in the age of social media and the fact we're all very much more connected now, people are more accessible, and there's more opportunity to gaslight people on social media than ever before.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
So as we come to the end of our time together, Amy, I wonder what you would want people who view this lecture, our colleagues who view this lecture, to take away from it.
I emphasise a lot at the end of the lecture itself as well, but the importance of validation from the therapist to the client and the psychoeducation that what they went through was actually abuse and manipulation, but also how careful you need to be, because often when friends do believe what has happened, they're very dismissive of anything other than that person is a bad person and leave it at that. Whereas actually the process of unpicking everything is so long that there needs to be a lot of patience, a lot of understanding of the kind of flipping back and forth between hating the abuser and actually still loving them. And yeah, the importance of patience and how long it can take to unpick everything.
Yes, to get people back to where they can make I guess a kind of a relative appraisal of what the relationship was. Well, It's always a joy speaking to you, Amy. This lecture isn't to be missed, because I think there's more kind of narcissistic abuse than we'd like to really think about. So as always, Amy, thank you very much.
Big thank you to Amy Launder and to you, Rory, for reaching out and hosting that interview. Really, really interesting. And if you're interested in hearing more of Amy's work, watching Amy lecture, her lectures are available in our Counsellor CPD library, and you can get more information about that just by going to counsellingtutor.com. There's 2 L's in counselling. We're based in the UK. That's how it's spelt here. Counsellingtutor.com. Have a look at the CPD library, and that's where you can get that information. Rory, this has been episode 229 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yeah, so we started off with the 7 stages of process, the final piece of theory in Carl Rogers' Trinity, that, of course, is person-centered therapy. The osmotic change, the journey that a client goes through in the arc of therapy, such an important piece of theory. Then we moved to focus on self. We talked about being reflexive and reflective and reflexive, things that we think about and things that we do, and the whole notion of accountability in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And finally, we finished with Amy Launder, who gave us a wonderful interview on working with survivors of narcissistic abuse. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.